On the 28th of April 1945, the former dictator of fascist Italy, along with his mistress, were ordered to get out of a vehicle. They probably didn't see their execution coming, but seconds later they were stood next to a wall outside of a villa, and the executioner littered the pair in bullets. Clara Petacci was just 33 years old when she was executed, and she was the long-standing mistress of Benito Mussolini. She had for a long time become infatuated with the dictator, and she achieved her goal of sleeping with him, but she faced a horrific end, and also following her death, her remains were strung up from a service station in front of an angry mob. Clara Petacci was born in Rome on the 28th of February 1912, and she grew up inside of a very well-off and high-profile family. Her father was a doctor to the Vatican and the Pope, and he regularly visited the Pope's palaces and looked after him. He was one of the most senior doctors in Italy, and because of this the family benefited greatly. But the family witnessed the rise of Mussolini and fascism, and her father also was a supporter, and he passed this on to Clara, his daughter, and she then became fascinated with the man who would become the Italian dictator. There was an assassination attempt on his life, and Clara spent her time writing love letters to him, and she said she would have killed his assassin if she was there. However, she had her own dreams as well as wanting to marry Mussolini. She initially dreamt of being a painter or an actress, and she did fall in love and got engaged to an officer in the Italian Air Force named Riccardo Federici. They married in 1934 when she was just 22 years old, but in the years before she had fleetingly met Benito Mussolini. She was driving with her fiancé of the time and her mother and sister, but a car went past them. It was Mussolini in his red Alfa, and the Petaccis then decided to follow. They managed to catch up with him, and Clara spoke to Mussolini, and the pair flirted, and he did then agree to meet up with her again. The pair then began to meet more and more often at the Palazzo Venezia, and they had an affair, but it was kept secret as Mussolini was married, but his wife knew that he was sleeping with many women. He loved the company of women, and his wife turned her back on what he was doing, but Mussolini regularly stated that Clara was special, and the pair spent long hours on the telephone speaking, and Mussolini became very devoted to his mistress. He said he was a lonely man who needed comfort, and he sought this in Clara, and he still believed that he was the saviour of the Italian people. Clara and her family were given huge gifts and benefits from her relationship with the Italian dictator. He gave a lot of gifts to her father, and his doctor's surgery became visited by some of the most powerful people in Italy. And her brother also had a lot of career progression. Her uncle was even summoned to paint for Mussolini. However, as the Second World War continued and Mussolini allied himself with Hitler and the Nazis, he attracted a lot of criticism from his close allegiance to Hitler. He regularly visited Hitler and spent time with him, and the pair became close friends. In the July of 1943, Mussolini fell from power, and he was seized by his own former government, who voted him out. He was locked up in prison, but then was broken out of prison by German commandos sent by Hitler to rescue him. Clara Petacci's relationship with Mussolini was considered inappropriate, and it was documented in the press, and there were lots of stories printed about the pair in the newspapers, and her family were also documented in the papers, especially with regards to their promotions and benefits that they got from Clara sleeping with the dictator. Mussolini, following his release, was placed in control and command of the Italian Social Republic. This was a Nazi puppet state in the north, and it was under German control. And Mussolini did not really have too much power, but he was hated by many of the people inside of the lands. The Italians saw him as a traitor, and many people thought he had sold to the nation out to the Allies, which led to the deaths of so many people. Clara Petacci continued her relationship with Mussolini, and the pair spent most of their time together, especially as his final days approached, and in the April of 1945, Mussolini and Clara tried to flee towards Lake Como, and they attempted to cross to Switzerland, which was neutral at the time, and they thought that they would get some form of protection from the Allies. They were then, on the 27th of April, packed aboard a German Air Force convoy, and they were going to head towards Germany, and they probably believed that Hitler would give them protection in Berlin, but days later he too would be dead. The convoy was then attacked by Italian partisan fighters near to the village of Congo, and the pair tried to hide out, but instead they were captured and passed over to the partisans, and they were treating all prominent former racists in the same way. They were quickly sentencing them to death and executing them. Clara Petacci and Mussolini were placed under arrest, and they were interrogated separately to begin with. But then the following day the pair were united and were brought back together. There was a huge announcement on the radio made about the seizure of Mussolini, and the partisans aimed to execute him swiftly, but they also believed that the execution platoon was too noble for him, and they wanted him to be put down like a dog. But Petacci would be executed alongside Mussolini, as she was someone who was a staunch fascist, and she benefited greatly from the fascist regime. She was collected by an Italian partisan named Walter Ordizio, along with Mussolini, and he would become her executioner. He was helped by a man named Aldo Lampri to carry out the execution of Petacci and Mussolini. The executioners set out from Milan to Dongo, where they were being held on the 28th of April 1945, and Ordizio claimed his real identity was Colonel Valerio, and they were taken to a village close to Lake Como. They were ordered out of the car outside of the Villa Belmont, a large house, and they were stood against a wall. The executioner, Ordizio, at 4:10 p.m., pulled out his machine gun and sprayed his bullets into Mussolini and Petacci, and the pair were mown down by the gunshots and were killed instantly. Following this, their remains were then taken into Milan and the Piazzale Loreto, which was a market square, and their remains were dumped on the floor. There were thousands of people gathered to see their bodies and remains, and the pair had their corpses spat at, and some even threw vegetables at the remains, and they were strung up high from a service station. They were hanged upside down on hooks in an act of shame, and when the Americans arrived at the square, the remains of Clara Petacci was completely disfigured. Clara was in her early 30s when she was executed, and she was subjected to a harrowing posthumous ordeal, and recently the news documented problems with her tomb, as it has had a number of issues. She was a woman who was smitten with Mussolini, a man who would have been out of her reach for a long time. However, through a chance meeting, the pair got together, and the fascist dictator became her boyfriend, and Clara became his mistress. She remained loyal by his side until the very end, and even posthumously, she remained next to him. Thank you for watching, and to support our channel, please remember to subscribe. And again, thank you so much for watching.